The rain hammered against the cathedral windows like accusations, each drop a reminder that even nature wept for men it shouldn't mourn. Robert Wilson stood at the back of the church, watching his father's casket being carried down the aisle by 6 men in expensive suits. Men who had worked for Charles Wilson, men who had feared him, but not one who had truly known him. Robert's siblings sat in the front row like royalty awaiting coronation. His older brother, Marcus, wore a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Robert's monthly rent. His sister, Vanessa, dabbed at perfectly dry eyes with a handkerchief that matched her Chanel ensemble. They looked like they were attending a business merger, not a funeral, because that's exactly what this was to them. Robert had arrived late intentionally, slipping in through the side door after the eulogies had begun. He'd heard Marcus's speech about a titan of industry and a visionary leader. He'd listened to Vanessa describe a devoted father who taught us the value of success. The words hung in the air like beautiful lies, carefully constructed and utterly hollow. No one mentioned the man who had spent 30 years building an empire while his youngest son watched from the margins. No one spoke of the distance that had grown between them like a canyon, unbridgeable and vast. The reception at the Wilson estate was exactly what Robert expected. A parade of power players and social climbers, all jockeying for position around Marcus and Vanessa, who had already begun acting like the new heirs to a kingdom. The mansion sprawled across 15 acres of manicured grounds, every room a testament to wealth that Robert had never felt comfortable in. He found himself standing alone by the library window, watching the catered staff move through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. This house had always felt like a museum to him, beautiful, impressive, but cold. A place where you weren't supposed to touch anything, including your own father. Robert. The voice belonged to Gerald Hutchins, his father's attorney for 40 years. The old man approached with careful steps, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked older than Robert himself. "I need to speak with you, privately." They moved to his father's study, a room Robert hadn't entered in 15 years. It smelled of leather and old books, of cigars and secrets. Gerald closed the door with a soft click that felt final. "The will was read to Marcus and Vanessa this morning," Gerald began, settling into one of the wing-backed chairs. "Your father's estate, valued at approximately $120 million, has been divided between them. The company, the properties, the investment portfolios, all of it." Robert nodded slowly. He'd expected nothing less. "And what did he leave me?" "A note telling me I was a disappointment." Gerald's weathered face softened. "He left you something else. Something he kept in his personal safe for 30 years. The attorney reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, rusty lockbox. It was maybe 10 inches wide, 8 inches deep, covered in oxidation and age. A cheap combination lock hung from the clasp. Robert stared at it, feeling something bitter rise in his throat. "That's it? Marcus gets the company worth billions, Vanessa gets the real estate empire, and I get a rusty box. Your father left specific instructions. I'm to tell you only this. The combination is the day you learned what really matters." Gerald set the box on the desk between them. "I don't know what that means, Robert, but your father was insistent that you receive this personally, that you open it alone." After Gerald left, Robert sat in his father's chair, the lockbox in his hands. It was surprisingly heavy, and the rust flaked off on his fingers like dried blood. Through the door, he could hear the party continuing. The clink of glasses, the murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and market trends. The day you learned what really matters. Robert's mind drifted back through the years, sifting through memories like sand. His childhood had been a series of empty rooms and absent father figures. While Marcus had been groomed to take over the company and Vanessa had been paraded at social events, Robert had been forgotten. Not unloved, exactly, but unnoticed. The third child, the spare, the one who didn't fit the mold. He tried at first, tried to be what his father wanted. But every attempt had been met with distracted praise or worse, silence. So Robert had gone his own way, studying literature instead of business, becoming a teacher instead of an executive, choosing a small apartment in the city over the family mansion. His father had called it throwing away your potential. Robert had called it finding myself. The day you learned what really matters. And then it hit him. August 14th, 15 years ago. The day everything had changed. Robert had been 22, fresh out of college, still trying to figure out who he was. He'd been volunteering at a community center in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, teaching kids to read. It was there he'd met Danny Martinez, a 7-year-old with missing front teeth and an appetite for stories that seemed endless. Danny's mother had been dying of cancer. No insurance, no family support, just a single mother and her son facing the unthinkable. Robert had done what he could, spending time with Danny, helping with homework, just being present. But it hadn't been enough. On August 14th, Danny had shown up at the community center alone. His mother had died that morning. The boy had nowhere else to go, so he'd come to the place where someone had shown him kindness. Robert had held that crying child for hours, promising him things would be okay even when he didn't believe it himself. And in that moment, something had crystallized in his mind. This mattered. Not stock prices or quarterly earnings or social status. This connection, this compassion, this willingness to show up for someone when their world was falling apart. He'd called his father that night, trying to explain what he'd experienced, why he wanted to dedicate his life to teaching, to helping kids like Danny. His father had listened in silence, then said, "That's very noble, Robert, but nobility doesn't pay bills." They'd barely spoken after that. Robert's hands trembled as he turned the combination lock. August 14th, 07. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth, was a letter in his father's handwriting. Beneath it, stacks of documents. Robert's breath caught as he unfolded the letter. His father's sharp, precise script filling the page. "My dearest Robert, preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've figured out the combination. Good. I knew you would remember that day, even if you thought I hadn't been listening. I was listening, son. I heard every word. What I never told you, what I couldn't find the courage to tell you while I was alive, is that the night you called me about Danny Martinez, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about the choices I'd made, the empire I'd built, and what it had cost me. I thought about your mother, who I'd lost to cancer when you were 5, just like Danny's mother. I thought about how I'd buried my grief in work and money, and how I taught Marcus and Vanessa to do the same. But you were different. You always were. You found something I'd lost, the ability to care about things that don't appear on balance sheets. The next morning, I made a decision. I created a trust in Danny Martinez's name. I paid for his education from elementary school through college. I made sure he had everything he needed, not in my name but anonymously through a foundation I established that day. But I didn't stop there. I thought about all the other Danny Martinezes out there, all the children who needed someone to show up when their world collapsed. So I created something bigger. Robert, inside this box are the documents for the Martinez Foundation. For the last 15 years, I've been funding it personally, quietly, keeping it separate from my public philanthropy. The foundation supports community centers in 12 cities, provides college scholarships to 200 students annually, and funds cancer treatment for families who can't afford it. The foundation's endowment is $20 million. And as of this moment, it's yours to run. Not Marcus, who would turn it into a tax shelter. Not Vanessa, who would use it for social climbing. You, Robert, because you're the only one who understands what it's really for. Your brother and sister got my money because they understand money. You got my heart because you understand what money should do. There's more. The smallest property in my portfolio, the one neither of them wanted, is a 10-unit apartment building on Maple Street. Do you remember it? It's 3 blocks from that community center where you met Danny. The deed is in this box. It's yours. I've been keeping the rents low, maintaining it personally, because I learned from you that some investments aren't about profit. I was a terrible father to you, Robert. I see that now. I was so afraid you'd be hurt by a world that doesn't reward kindness that I pushed you away instead of celebrating what made you special. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Instead, I disappointed you. But watching you from a distance these 15 years, seeing you become a teacher, seeing you pour yourself into those kids, seeing you build a life based on meaning instead of money has been my greatest pride. I just never learned how to tell you. One more thing. Danny Martinez graduated from Columbia last spring with a degree in social work. He doesn't know about the foundation, doesn't know who helped him. But he knows someone did. And now he's paying it forward, working with at-risk youth in the Bronx. You changed his life, Robert. And in doing so, you changed mine. Tell your brother and sister I'm sorry I couldn't teach them what you learned on your own. Tell them the measure of wealth isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. And tell yourself that you were never the disappointment. You were always the success story. I just didn't have the wisdom to see it until you showed me. The world needs more people like you, son. That's why I'm trusting you with this. Make it grow. Help more kids like Danny. And know that in doing so, you're honoring what should have been my legacy all along. With love and regret, Dad. Robert's vision blurred, tears falling onto his father's handwriting, smudging the ink. His hands shook as he lifted the documents from the box. Incorporation papers for the Martinez Foundation, the deed to the Maple Street building, bank statements showing regular deposits into the foundation's accounts, and photographs. Dozens of photographs. Pictures of children at community centers, kids graduating from high school and college, families standing in front of new homes. And in the margin of each photo, in his father's handwriting, notes: scholarship recipient, first in family to attend college. Mother's cancer treatment funded, now in remission. 3 siblings kept together instead of separated in foster care. His father had been documenting every life touched by the foundation, every small miracle funded by money that could have bought another yacht or vacation home. And at the bottom of the box, one more photograph. Robert lifted it with trembling fingers. It showed him at 22, sitting on the floor of the community center with Danny on his lap, reading a book. He didn't remember anyone taking this picture. But there he was, young and uncertain, doing the thing that had defined the rest of his life. On the back, his father had written, "The day my son taught me what really matters. August 14, 2007. Robert didn't know how long he sat there, crying over a rusty lockbox that had held more wealth than his siblings would ever understand. Eventually, he heard voices outside the study door. Marcus and Vanessa, their tones sharp with irritation. "Where is he? We need to discuss the estate transition." "Probably sulking somewhere. You know Robert, always the martyr." Robert wiped his eyes and stood, gathering the documents back into the box. When he opened the door, his siblings stood in the hallway, faces flushed with champagne and triumph. "There you are," Marcus said, his tone dismissive. "Listen, we need to coordinate on the estate sale. Some of Dad's personal items." "I need to show you something," Robert interrupted quietly. They followed him back into the study, their expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood. Robert laid out the documents on his father's desk, one by one, explaining the foundation, the building, the 15 years of quiet philanthropy their father had hidden from everyone. Vanessa's face went pale. $20 million? He gave you $20 million. He gave me the chance to help people, Robert corrected. "There's a difference." Marcus snatched up the foundation documents, scanning them with the practiced eye of someone who read contracts for breakfast. "This can't be legal. We'll contest it. This should have been part of the estate distribution." "Read the letter," Robert said, sliding it across the desk. They read in silence, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion to something that might have been shame. Vanessa's hand trembled as she set down the pages. She walked to the window, her back to both brothers, her shoulders beginning to shake. "He never told us," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All these years, and he never said anything about this. About you. About what he really thought mattered." Marcus had collapsed into their father's chair, the letter clutched in his fist. His face had gone through several shades of red before settling on something close to gray. "I told him you were wasting your life," he said, his voice hollow. 2 years before he died, we had this massive fight about it. He kept bringing you up, talking about your students, asking if I'd read the article about your literacy program in the Times. I told him to stop living vicariously through your charity work and focus on the business. Robert felt something shift in his chest. What did he say? He said. Marcus's voice cracked, and for the first time since they were children, Robert saw his brother cry. He said, Marcus, you're going to inherit everything I built. But Robert inherited the one thing I wish I'd kept, the ability to see people as more than assets. Then he asked me to leave his office. We barely spoke after that. Vanessa turned from the window, mascara streaking her cheeks. I thought he was proud of me. The galas, the charity boards, the society pages. He'd introduce me to his friends, show me off like I was some kind of trophy. But this, she gestured at the photographs scattered across the desk. This is what he actually cared about, and he never once asked me to be part of it. Maybe he thought you wouldn't understand, Robert said softly. Or maybe he thought it was too late. Is it? Vanessa asked, her eyes meeting his. Too late. Robert looked at his siblings, really looked at them, and saw past the designer clothes and the corporate armor. He saw the brother who used to build blanket forts with him on rainy days, before their father had started training him to take over the empire. He saw the sister who had taught him to ride a bike, who had read him bedtime stories when their mother was too sick and their father was too busy. He saw family. Broken, distant, but still family. The foundation needs board members, Robert said finally. It needs people who understand finance and real estate and how to make money grow. It needs... He looked at his siblings. It needs family. Marcus lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed. You'd want us involved? After everything? After the way we've treated you? Dismissed you? Made you feel like an outsider at your own father's funeral? Dad left us each what we needed to learn from, Robert said. Maybe the lesson isn't finished yet. Maybe he wanted us to find our way back to each other through this. Vanessa picked up one of the photographs. A young girl receiving a scholarship check, her face radiant with hope. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I know how to plan fundraisers where people write checks to feel good about themselves. I don't know how to actually help. Neither did I, Robert said. When I met Danny, I had no idea what I was doing. I just showed up. That's all anyone really needs. Someone to show up. Marcus stood, walking around the desk to face Robert directly. I've spent my entire life trying to be him, he said, gesturing vaguely at the mansion around them. Their father's legacy of wealth and power. I thought that's what success looked like. But you walked away from all of this and built something that actually mattered. I don't know if I can be that person, Robert. I don't know if it's in me. You're here, aren't you? Robert said. You could have walked away, contested the foundation, tied it up in legal battles for years. But you're here asking questions. That's a start. The three of them stood in their father's study as the afternoon light faded, the sounds of the reception drifting through the door like echoes from another world. On the desk between them lay a rusty lockbox and the pieces of a puzzle they were only beginning to understand. Tell me about Danny, Vanessa said suddenly. Tell me everything. So Robert did. He told them about a 7-year-old boy who had lost everything and still found the courage to walk into a community center looking for hope. He told them about teaching Danny to read, about watching him struggle with words and then suddenly break through, his face lighting up with the joy of understanding. He told them about the day Danny's mother died, about holding a child who had nowhere else to turn. And as he spoke, he pulled out more photographs from the box. Not just Danny, but dozens of other children. Maria, who had become a nurse. James, who was now teaching at the same community center where Robert had started. The Chen family, whose restaurant had been saved from closure by a foundation microloan. Each photograph was a story, each story a life transformed. Marcus picked up the incorporation papers for the Martinez Foundation, studying them with the analytical mind that had made him successful in business. The investment strategy is conservative, he observed. Safe, stable, but not growing much beyond inflation. With the right restructuring, we could potentially double the endowment's earning potential in 5 years without increasing risk. Robert asked quietly. Marcus met his eyes. If you'll have me, I can't promise I'll be good at the personal side of this, but I can make the money work harder. I can make sure every dollar Dad put into this foundation becomes $2, $3. I can give you the resources to help more kids like Danny. Vanessa was flipping through a ledger she'd found in the box, one that detailed the foundation's expenses. You're paying market rent for office space, she said, and some of these community centers are in buildings you're leasing at commercial rates. She looked up. I own 17 buildings in this city. 3 of them are in neighborhoods where your foundation operates. Consider the rent forgiven. And I can talk to other property owners I know, get you better rates, maybe even donated space. Why? Robert asked, the word barely a whisper. Why now? Vanessa's eyes filled with tears again. Because I just realized I've spent 38 years of my life collecting things. Properties, clothes, connections, and I can't remember the last time any of it made me feel the way you look in this photograph. She held up the picture of Robert and Danny. You look complete, like you've found exactly where you're supposed to be. I want that, even if I don't deserve it. None of us deserve it, Robert said. That's the point. Grace isn't about deserving. It's about showing up and doing the work anyway. Marcus pulled out his phone, already slipping into executive mode. I'm canceling my meetings for the next week. I want to visit every community center the foundation supports. I want to see what Dad built, what you've been doing, and I want to understand how we can do more. I'm coming too, Vanessa said quickly, and I want to meet Danny, if he's willing. Robert felt something loosening in his chest, a knot that had been tied there for 15 years beginning to unravel. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet. This wasn't healing, not completely. But it was a beginning. It was 3 people standing in a dead man's study, looking at a rusty lockbox, and choosing to see possibility instead of division. There's something else, Robert said, pulling out the last document from the box. It was a letter, but not in his father's handwriting. The envelope was addressed to Charles Wilson, dated 6 months before his death. I think this is from Danny. He opened it carefully, and they read together. Dear anonymous benefactor, I don't know who you are, but I know what you've done. Someone paid for my education. Someone made sure I had what I needed when I had nothing. Someone believed in me when I had every reason to give up. I'm writing this because I just graduated from Columbia, and I'm about to start a job working with kids who remind me of who I was. Lost, scared, and desperate for someone to show them a way forward. I'm going to spend my life paying forward what you gave me. I don't need to know your name. I just need you to know that you changed my life. And because you changed my life, I'm going to change others. Your kindness doesn't end with me. It ripples out, touching people you'll never meet, creating futures you'll never see. That's the real inheritance, isn't it? Not money or property, but the choice to lift someone up and trust that they'll do the same for others. Thank you for giving me a chance. I promise I won't waste it. With eternal gratitude, Danny Martinez. The letter fell from Robert's hands, and his siblings caught him as his knees buckled. They stood there, the 3 of them, holding each other up in their father's study, crying for a man who had learned too late what mattered and 3 children who were learning just in time. Outside, the reception was ending. Their father's wealthy friends were departing in their expensive cars, already moving on to the next event, the next opportunity. But in this room, 3 people were making a different choice. They were choosing to open a rusty lockbox and find treasure inside. They were choosing family over fortune. They were choosing to finish the lesson their father had started. 3 months later, Robert stood in front of the newly renovated community center on Maple Street, watching a ribbon-cutting ceremony he'd never imagined would happen. The building gleamed with fresh paint, new windows, and a sign that read, Charles Wilson Community Center, where every life matters. Marcus had restructured the foundation's investments, tripling its earning potential while keeping its mission intact. Vanessa had leveraged her real estate connections to secure donations of 3 additional properties for conversion into youth centers. Together, they'd taken their father's quiet legacy and amplified it. But more than that, they'd started talking. Really talking. Not about quarterly earnings or property values, but about their mother, their childhoods, the distance that had grown between them and the bridges they were trying to build. In the crowd, Robert spotted a young man in his mid-20s, helping set up chairs for the ceremony. Danny Martinez had agreed to come, and today he would learn the truth about who had funded his education. Robert had decided that some mysteries were meant to be solved, and Danny deserved to know that his life had changed not just one man, but an entire family. Marcus stood beside Robert, his sleeves rolled up, having spent the morning helping prepare the center. He'd been coming to the foundation's facilities every weekend, learning the names of the kids, understanding their stories. Last week, he'd tutored a teenager in math and cried when the boy finally understood algebra. Vanessa was inside, organizing the community members who had come to celebrate. She'd traded her designer wardrobe for jeans and practical shoes, and Robert couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her smile so freely. As Robert prepared to give his speech, he felt the weight of the rusty lockbox in his memory, the lightest, heaviest thing his father had ever given him. In his pocket, he carried the photograph of himself and Danny, the one his father had cherished enough to keep in a safe for 15 years. The crowd quieted. Robert stepped to the microphone. "My father once told me that nobility doesn't pay bills," he began. He was wrong. It pays something far more valuable. It pays attention, pays respect, pays love forward into a world that desperately needs it. This community center stands as proof that one act of compassion, one moment of choosing people over profit, can echo through years and transform hundreds of lives. He saw Marcus and Vanessa in the front row, both in jeans and t-shirts for the first time he could remember. They'd volunteered that morning, painting walls and hauling furniture. Vanessa had paint in her hair. Marcus had calluses forming on his hands. They looked happy. "My father left me a rusty lockbox at his funeral," Robert continued. "My siblings got his estate. But what we've all learned is that the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive. It's what you choose to do with it. Today, we open these doors not to honor a rich man, but to honor what he learned too late in life. That wealth measured in changed lives is the only wealth that really matters." The applause was warm, genuine. Children from the neighborhood poured through the doors, their faces bright with excitement at the new computers, the art supplies, the library full of books. Robert watched them scatter through the space, claiming it as their own, and felt his father's presence like a hand on his shoulder. After the ceremony, Robert brought Danny to the side, with Marcus and Vanessa joining them. It was time for Danny to know the truth. "Danny," Robert began, his voice steady despite the emotion, "there's something I need to tell you about your education, about the foundation that helped you." He explained everything, the phone call to his father 15 years ago, the anonymous trust, the photographs, the letter Danny had written that Charles Wilson had kept until his death. Danny listened in stunned silence, his eyes growing wider with each revelation. "Your father," Danny whispered. "All this time, it was your father? You changed his life," Robert said. "You showed him what really mattered. And in doing so, you gave our family a second chance." Danny looked at the three siblings, tears streaming down his face. Then, without warning, he pulled Robert into a fierce embrace. "You held me the day my mother died," he said. "You were the first person who made me feel like I wasn't alone. And you never stopped. Even when you didn't know it, you were still there." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand to Danny. "I'd like to offer you a position," he said. "Director of Youth Programs for the Martinez Foundation. We're expanding to 10 more cities, and we need someone who understands what these kids are going through. Someone who's lived it." Danny stared at the offered hand, then at the three siblings who had somehow become his family without him even knowing it. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll help you build what your father started." As the sun set over Maple Street, Robert stood with his siblings and Danny on the steps of the community center, watching the neighborhood come alive with possibility. Marcus put an arm around his shoulder. Vanessa leaned her head against his arm. Danny stood beside them, no longer the lost boy but a man who had found his purpose. "Dad would have loved this," Vanessa said softly. "No," Robert replied, pulling the photograph from his pocket and showing it to them all. "He did love this. We just never knew. And now we get to finish what he started. In the fading light, they looked at the image of Robert and 7-year-old Danny, reading together on a floor 15 years ago, the moment when everything had changed, the moment when a rusty lockbox had been filled with love instead of gold. And they understood, finally, that they'd all been given exactly what they needed. It had just taken them this long to open their eyes and see it. The greatest inheritance wasn't the $120 million estate. It wasn't even the $20 million foundation. It was the choice to love more than you accumulate, to give more than you take, and to understand that every life you touch creates ripples that never end. That was the real treasure in the rusty lockbox. And now, together, they would spend the rest of their lives proving it. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.